getting better at this.
You are.
I'm just tickled to death. Hello, we are live from the Crystal Clear Point Studios with Lou Ann and Crystal and me, Deb. I'm wound up.
Hola, Martin.
I,
How y'all doing?
I'm wound up. I am wound up because I've been through it today with Lou Ann. She's taken me all through this stuff today. We almost went to jail. We were rowdy. We were renegade.
Allegedly, it's Luann's fault, but Luann has no
Well,
recollection of this.
it is my
It
fault that we met together because I freaked out.
did. She
But
calls me screaming last night. I need your help.
I am not.
What? Go ahead. Go ahead.
I,
Go ahead.
we did not go to jail, and there's not even any chance of her going to jail at all.
Do you know why we did not go to jail? Because I had just come from the jail. I left jail this morning and went straight to your place because I had to go to court to file for my deferred adjudication for my one and only speeding ticket I've ever had in my life that I did not deserve. Injustice. This world is full of injustice.
In a school zone, Deborah, you need to be protecting these children instead of being a menace.
Hey, I was over by high school. I should have been running over those kids. They were driving like maniacs. And I was going with the flow of the traffic. I had a car in front of me, I had a car behind me, and he was on my rear. And so I put my blinker on and moved over to give myself some breathing room. And the minute I moved over, boom, that little motorcycle jock came out.
Boom.
Boom. And here's what I know. Here's what I do know. Even if I was doing 29 and a 20, I had to be slowing down because we were coming up to a red light and I was having to stop and I did not run the red light. So I was slowing down regardless. You understand my stand here? I don't even care about that. I don't mind paying my dues. What I care about is the guy was just hateful. He said 2 words to me. It took a minute and a half to write me a ticket and throw it in my window. And even my granddaughter was like, well, he's not very nice. And I'm the daughter of a cop. I'm the niece of a cop. My grandfather was a fireman, so I do think I know a little bit about civil service. And I just think the man could have been a little bit kinder and nicer, especially since I just paid probably a third of his weekly paycheck with what I paid today. So there you have it.
Well, on the plus side, since you've grown up, around law enforcement professionals, then you've been exposed from a very young age to some of the paraphernalia that'll be used, discussed during our topic today, right?
Well, I think that probably led me into my fascination with that paraphernalia. Had something to do with like chaps, leather chaps, and
motorcycle cops, were we, or horse cops?
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
Anyway, y'all think we're just old women up here amusing ourselves, and we are. Too bad, so sad. But today we're really going to amuse ourselves because we're going to be talking about BDSM.
And what's that stand for, Deb, for those out there who may not understand? Maybe they've seen the letters, but they don't know what those letters mean.
You know what's sad about what you just said is that I think that there's probably a lot of people that don't know what that means. It seems like we as a community, society, as a country have stepped backwards. And even my granddaughter said this yesterday. She goes, this is like you're in the 60s. And I said, in the 60s, we were more enlightened. The older kids were dropping acid and dropping pot and dropping out and dropping in. And I just think that we were more enlightened and we were more involved in civil rights, equal rights, equality, that type of thing. And I think we're just going backwards. But I digress. BDSM. BDSM is the proper way to say it. Bondage, domination, sadomasochism.
Woohoo!
Let's get your leathers on and get your butts open. Your minds open. So Luann was going to surprise us. I remember this from last week. when we told her what we were going to talk about, she said she had a
Yeah,
surprise.
I've been waiting in anticipation.
So I read romance novels, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of those romance novels are like vampires and werewolves and that sort of thing. That's fine. So I'm looking around for a book to read on my app that's free books because you see ads all the time.
Mhm.
So there was a series of books, and I think the author is the same, Sierra Cartwright.
Oh, I've
And
heard that
she,
name.
and she did 3 or 4 books. So I thought, okay, so this is a series of books. Well, I'll read them. What is the subject of the book? BDSM. Did I know
Mhm.
that? No. But I read them anyway and went, oh.
Oh,
And you liked it. I read
And
the book and I liked it. I liked
and
it.
um and I can see why if somebody's truly going to practice that, it's about taking care of your sub after.
and what is the name of these books again?
Well, the last one I read is called The Sexiest Billionaire.
Oh, good God. I
Yeah.
hate these
Yeah,
titles.
yeah, this
But
kind of reminds. Go ahead.
that's what I was looking for. I was looking for the name of the other books that were in the series, and I really no.
Well, Sierra Cartwright, go to Google and you can find them. There's
Yeah.
a lot
Ah,
of books out there. Anne
Well,
Rice,
what,
were
what?
you
Yeah,
borrow
Anne
people?
Rice, Anne Rampling, Anne Roquelaire. Yep.
She wrote under a pseudonym and did a whole series called the Beauty Series. Um,
Erotic Adventures of Sleeping Beauty
yeah, and
by
they were pretty.
Anne Roquelaire.
Yep, they were pretty good. There's a story of O. Most people are familiar with that, and there's all kinds of trashy books out there. And
Exit
then,
to
of
Eden,
course,
Anne Rampling.
you know what? I have to tell you this though. All right, I loved the movie Exit to
I did
Eden.
too. I did too. Paint my
Well, here's why.
house.
Here's why. First of all, to see Rosie O'Donnell in leather was just a hoot nanny. Okay, and then when she's supposed to be doing her dominatrix thing, she's going, "Paint my house." That's so mean. You want to serve me? Paint my house.
Oh, look, my first introduction to this, obviously outside of like the movies like Porky's and Porky's Revenge and all that, typical teenage movies of the 80s. There wasn't a lot in there. And then of course there were the other risque movies like Klute. And then when we got into the what was Nuts with Barbara Streisand, and the discussions that they had about the things that she would do for pay, things like that. And then, but it wasn't until I was like in my early 20s, I went over to a friend's house and I'd reconnected with somebody that I barely knew from high school. I was a loner. I literally sat in the corner, read books and stuff. And then he was part of the stoners. And so he stayed drunk and high during school. But we kind of reconnected, and got to know him and his girlfriend and all that good stuff. And they introduced me to the Anne Roquelaire beauty trilogy. And as rumor has it, allegedly, when couples or people read this first book, they don't leave their bedroom for 2 or 3 days. And I can honestly say I did not leave my bedroom for like 2 solid weeks. I didn't have to reading these books. Because it was just
Made
such.
me want to leave and go hunt.
Well, for me, it wasn't even so much about the eroticism as the stimulation of the mind, because even though the descriptors were very highly sexualized, very erotic, and very physical in nature, what really struck me about it is the psycho-spiritual nature. Does that make sense? So the psychological effects in the mind of both the sub and the dom, versus the spiritual aspects of that. So that launched me down the rabbit hole of researching, like histories of BDSM, and from not just the physical sexual thing, but also from the psychological and from the spiritual aspects of it. So I've been excited all week about this conversation. So
Well, you bring up a really good point, and we're just going to jump right into it because most people are going to, first of all, let me define dom and sub, dominant and submissive. You also have what we call a switch, someone who does both. And then there are people that prefer one role over the other. Okay.
that's the
And
basic, yeah.
that's the basics. So we just have that to work with. The other thing is that primarily most people, when they think of BDSM, they think of kink, they think of fetishes, they think of kinky sex fetishes. I am here to tell you that there is a huge group of people that it has nothing to do about sex. And
Right.
Crystal's already hit on a huge part of it, is that sometimes this is a safe way for what we now call play therapy for adults, basically, for them to work through trauma and anxieties in a safe way and in a safe manner, for them to deal with things that they have not healed from in their past. And I personally have experienced this. I'll just go on the limb and say that. That's why we're talking about it, because I feel like I know what I'm talking about. This is not me just reading books and watching movies. And it is a way of getting into people's heads. And that's the part I love, is getting into people's heads. What makes them tick? How do you manipulate those ticks in a way that can be positive, but also it lets you explore. I'm always talking about the fact that I have a dark side. That's where I learned to explore my dark side and not be afraid of it. Now, Luann, when you were reading the books, was it all about sex for you? Or did you see other things, other dynamics that you related to?
It was the dynamic between the dom and the submissive, and how most of these women did not want to relinquish any kind of control. So I identified with that. I don't want to relinquish any kind of control to someone.
Yeah.
Well, and that brings up a really good point, because most people that have had experience in this line of work, I sort of say line of work, in this lifestyle.
Well,
But
it can also be a line of work, though.
Yes, it can be. I had someone offer me $1 million to open up a dungeon, which I did not do, because I did not want to be beholding to anyone, and I did not want this to be a way of making a living, because it was more about what I needed, not what I wanted to be doing in my life. But
Yeah.
But a lot of people will tell you that if you are the submissive, you're the one in charge. Now, why do you think that is? Betty Boop and the girls, go ahead.
Okay. Well, because like I said, this is one of the things that, and nobody told me this. When after, obviously once I became like liberated, more mature, if you will, as a young adult, living in Dallas, I had already read and reread, The Erotic Adventures of Sleeping Beauty, which led me to Exit to Eden, and a few other tomes here and there. And then I lucked out, and I wound up in a lovely little space here in the DFW area, which back then was known as the Eagle.
I knew you were going
Okay.
to say that.
Yeah, the Eagle, and it's still known as the Eagle.
The Eagle.
Yeah. Now, let me give you a set the stage. Like if you were to go in there today and walk in with a pair of slacks or a dress on, or anything that was not a dress code, you probably would be fine. But back in this particular era of the early 90s and late 80s, if you walked in and you were not in dress code, that meant, depending upon how you were presenting within that community, it could be something as simple as a white shirt and jeans, or leather of some sort, or harness. But don't be wearing underwear. There was always a panty check at the door. If you were wearing underwear, man or woman, it didn't matter.
I had
Hidden Door was the
forgotten
same
that.
thing. The Hidden Door Club in Dallas also for the longest time was an underground leather sex BDSM club. That's why it was called the Hidden Door. I remember to this day, first time I went into that bar, they did an underwear check, and I didn't know the dress code, so they ripped mine off, and they literally, there was camo netting used to back in the day above the patio. They would, and when you looked up, there was all these underwear and panties hanging from the netting because you were out of dress code. Oh, and don't get caught with a pair of white denim jeans. Good Lord. But that was another story. But what got me into that aspect was I ended up meeting a gentleman and having a really great conversation with him. He really got like me thinking up here about different things. We were playing darts, which is something I love to do. And one thing led to another. We made a date, and I knew what, we discussed what would happen in the date. I got there early. He literally sat me down and told me, okay, this is my idea of the scene. This is, and sometimes they call it a scene, sometimes they call it a situation or a story, but the most common term I've heard is the scene. And then basically, and it's like, do I have your permission? What came out of his mouth? And I'm like, that completely, nobody had ever discussed that to me before. And the whole point is, it made me realize that in the end, I'm the one that has to allow this person to do these things for me, not necessarily to me. I realized at that point it wasn't always just supposed to be to me like it is in the books. It was for me. And I had a choice. And ultimately, I'm the one that gets to agree to the limits. I'm the one that gets to set the limits of where I'm willing to go, what I'm willing to do, uh, right up until agreeing to a safe word. So everything that, in my mind, that signifies legitimacy has to do with communication, and agreement. There has to be that agreement between the two, and there also has to be a type of either an instinctual, innate trust for that person or something that you've grown to know over time. Because I'm going to tell you right now, if I don't trust you with every fiber of my being, it's not happening, because I need to have that thing, which then led me into the whole concept of, it just because somebody is acting in the role of the submissive and being penetrated or receiving the electro or the spanking or whatever the scenario is at that time, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the sub. It could also be that they're the one dominant and they're having that other person do that to them. There's that whole aspect again, what's going on in the mind of the participants. And in the end, there has to be an agreement. And so getting back to that original point, the sub is really the one with the power and in control. It all stems from that agreement. And I said,
Well,
this is what I'm willing to do.
it boils down to this whole concept, and this is one of the things I learned very early on in my young adult explorations, is if you break your toys, you don't get to play.
Yeah,
And
Mom and dad taught us that, right? If we
yeah,
break our toys, we don't get them anymore. They get thrown
that's
away or
right.
they get given to somebody
That's
else who'll
right.
take care of them.
And that extends out
What are
not
you?
just to that person that you may have done an ill-gotten scene with or something. The
Yeah.
community, I think, is probably still small, but back then it was small. You had your gay community and you had your swinger community that crossed over, and then you had the pet people, and those were the people exchanging power, and those were more of the non-sexual players. But
Mhm.
they were all small enough and people crossed over those lines so that if you got a bad reputation as being unsafe or not following guidelines and following safe words and things like that, then people learn not to play with you. And you basically got blacklisted, is what it boiled down to.
and
So,
the books I read also brought that out, that, you know, you have to agree to certain things and you have to have your absolutely nots and your, I guess, gray area, or what do you call that?
Well, there's the shades of gray. Literally, that's why the book was named that, is because you have your black and white, is not, and then you have those gray areas in between where they begin to blend. And
Well,
that's where people really start pushing boundaries.
and that's what PEP, people exchanging power, was all about. It was about being able to feel the energy. It was energy plays, what it boils down to. Okay. And sometimes
Mhm.
it would be sexual and sometimes it would not. But it's about reading the energy between you and your other player and knowing when you can push boundaries and when you can push limits and when you need to back off. Maybe they said they wanted this, but once they got involved in it, it was not how they imagined. And you have to be able to read that person and their energy. And, my big thing was always getting into people's heads. I like the mind games. I'm a mind game player and I like pushing the boundaries. But if you're not good at reading the body language and the energy levels and things like that, you're going to fail at that miserably. And so there's, for those that have not ever experienced this or not very much, or maybe you like getting your butt spanked, but that's, to me, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. If you like your butt getting warmed
Well,
up
it
before,
can. It just depends on the intensity. So I wanna pause right there for just a second because you mentioned for those of you that may have never really experienced this. And so my question is have you ever been in a situation, either as a child or an adult, where you were told no, or boundaries were set and you pushed against those boundaries? Because to me, this whole concept of dom and sub and agreements and boundaries is really no different than a parent or setting boundaries with their children or boundaries with their loved ones, saying you can do this or you can do that, or I'm not going to allow this. I think, to me, what's the difference is the intent, the intensity, and the degree, if you will, to which this is. And so, for me, what we're talking about with the adult stuff, if you will, with the BDSM, is really just more of an overt expression of the more or less covert actuality of that whole system of setting boundaries and pushing against them, giving permission, gaining permission, being denied permission, things like that we go through as children and young adults as we're growing and learning and experiencing. And then so for me, thinking back on it and making those psychological connections, it's really just it's an extension. And at a certain point, we as adults decided, okay, we need to explore this more in our life and get that.
see, I
Does
would
that
tend to
make
disagree.
sense?
It makes sense what you're saying, but I would tend to disagree with you.
Okay, that's
What
fair.
what you described is what we used to call pushy bottoms. And
Bossy bottoms.
and the reason we called them that is that generally that personality would fall into a description of someone who was still dealing with teenage angst.
Mhm,
And if you are a more sophisticated or more experienced pain player or
mhm.
power player, this is not going to suit you well because you will find them trying to move you into a parental authority figure. And that's not what this is about. I walked away from those immediately because that's not where I
Mhm.
wanted to go. Not at all.
Yeah, well,
So,
and then that connects to the mother son,
yeah,
father
no,
son, mother daughter,
no,
father
no, not
daughter
doing it. Not doing it.
scenarios, because there's
That's
that
just
whole
too
kink
weird
and
for me.
fetish play that goes along with that.
Oh, nope, nope, not doing that. I
Like,
don't, that's a whole nother spectrum. We're not going in there today. We might do it
honestly,
later
honestly
because
though, that
I'm very
still
focused in my
happens.
play.
Online, people see my age, like they see my age and they realize, oh my God, she's 53. Oh my God, she's mature. And then literally, I can't count the number of times in the last year, strange people have hit me up online and said, may I call you mommy?
Oh no, get away from me. Ah! No, the other thing you will not call me is mistress. No, 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 no. I was the queen, or you could call me ma'am, but we aren't going to go anywhere else. That's no, no. But anyway, what I was going to say is that there's basically three stages of this type of play or this type of
Mhm,
exchange or interaction. There's the first part, which is the communication, the negotiation, the contracts. If you're really heavily involved in this type of thing, where you're going to say, this is what I want, This is what I expect. This is an absolute no for me. This is a hardcore no. And this is where I'm willing to flex. Okay. You define those boundaries, you define safe words, and we even had stages. We had, like you have stoplights, there's green,
Mhm.
yellow, red. We had stages so that if we were having trouble gauging one another, and those words work both ways. Because
Yeah.
sometimes submissives will ask dominants to do things that they have. Like, no, do not ask me to change that diaper. No. No. You go find somebody else. No. So everybody has their stages and they have their desires and they have what they're trying to get out of this. I was a mind player and I was a pain player, not a
Mhm.
sexual player, not a fetish player, not even into really role playing. I was into games, but
Mhm.
not roles. You know,
Yeah.
um, I was pretty hardcore, and so then you have your actual scene, and then 2B of your scene is whether or not you want to negotiate whether you want to continue this relationship for future
Mhm.
play. Now, the most important part, though, is part 3, and that's the nurturing and aftercare for the submissive to make
Yeah.
sure, especially if there's a lot of physical play involved. Endorphins. You got endorphins. You got
Mhm.
all the things that come to the body if there's pain involved. You've got to make sure that they're cuddled, that they're warm, that they get nutrition, that they get water, so that the body doesn't go into freak out mode. So the brain doesn't go out into freak out mode.
Mhm.
You have to touch them, you have to cuddle them, stroke them, tell them that you're very happy with their performance, those type of things. And that's why this was an important aspect of my personal life because it taught me how to care about people. It taught me how to nurture people and how to think about their needs and to see where they were at and be able to not just listen to their words, oh, I'm okay, but also be able to read their body symptoms and their language and all those things.
Mhm.
See what's going on in those eyes. And that's also where I learned to read energy and figured out I could actually see spiritual energy. So
Mhm.
BDSM was a huge part of my personal, mental, emotional, and spiritual growth. So when people
Yeah.
say it's not spiritual, they're full of crap or they're not doing it right.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people have misconceptions about the community that, oh, they'll have sex with anybody or they'll play with
Whew,
anybody and anything like
good.
that. And you kind of mentioned the word there, bondage. One of the root words of bondage is bonding, and it's to bond with somebody. And there you mentioned the word contract specifically, which got me it reminded me of a few conversations that I've had with somebody that Deb and I both know very well. And there's a very common symbol of that contract, as I recall, in that BDSM community. And don't you dare let somebody, if you're out in the club, whatever, touch that symbol of that contract, because
Oh,
Deb will
yeah.
punch you.
Yeah, that was one of my first experiences at the Eagle was the freedom that you had, but also the obligation that you had in caring for the people that
Mhm.
you're responsible for and
So
protecting them.
something resembling this, maybe.
Yes, yes. Don't touch mine. That's mine. Don't touch
There's a
it.
loop right here just for that.
Yes. And I had a gentleman challenge me on that one night, and he learned that not to challenge me on that anymore. That's mine. Don't touch it. So
Mhm.
it is a very physical and it is a very not assertive, but an aggressive mindset, which I was born for. I was
Yeah.
born for it.
Now, for those who know, now I also understand. Now we've also talked about the concepts of dom and sub, right? So there's an entire like language to the paraphernalia, correct? So if I'm wearing this on the left hand side, at least from the LGBTQ side, typically this means I'm going to be dominant,
Mhm.
or I'm the master or the dom. And if we're wearing it on the right, typically it means that I'm going to be the submissive that evening. Or that's what in the mood I'm for. And for somebody that's a switch person, they might actually wear them on both wrists or one, or they might move them throughout the night from one side to the other. And that extends to different things too, like what side of your body is your belt buckled on, to what side is, what nipple do you have pierced, what color handkerchief, and what side of your body is the handkerchief on, things like that. So I mean, it's a very intricate, evolved over time. And when I say time, I mean thousands of years. But with like the positioning of the bodies more in the last couple of 100 years here in the US, I think, because I think the whole concept of the dom and sub, left, right, hanky code, and all that originated with the hanky code back in San Francisco,
Yes.
back when there was the gold rush, and there was not very many women, and so men would get to dance with each other, and they would have the hanky code. What side of the hanky body was the pocket? What pocket was the hanky in, front or back? And so were you going to be the leader or the follower in the all male dance that night at the saloon, because there were no women at that point, in the mining camps and stuff like that. And then also the hanky code evolved because of the colors. Okay, what are you into? What type of play are you into? Things like that. So when we're talking about this community, I want people out there to know it's not just, like you said, about sex. It's not all just about um power and stuff like that. Sometimes it's about conforming to social norms when you don't have every aspect of the social norm there to come into, like in the case with the hanky code origination and the left right versus dom sub or lead follow. um so just I want people out there to know that there's more than just that sexual aspect of it, because there is a spiritual aspect to this type of lifestyle, and some people will only experience this once in their life. Some people may get really deep into experiencing this whole spiritual aspect of it. I can say for me, there were things that were let go of, that were processed in that one night, that were released. um, I literally can say that after 5.5, almost 6 hours of the scene, which was I guess, a very long scene, uh, for the first time in my life, I actually felt cleansed. I felt more cleansed than I did after baptism at 8 years old, if that makes sense. Psychologically, I was clear. Um, I might have had a little trouble walking or sitting for a few days, but uh, I had released a lot of stuff, and that led me into looking at some of the more spiritual aspects of things like BDSM, and how that plays a role in some people's lives, not all.
Well,
Like,
the thing that's interesting that you don't ever hear about, you don't see in the media or anything, is that there are groups, or there used to be, because I have to say this right up front. I am no longer a participant in this lifestyle. I
mhm,
left it for spiritual. I joined it for intrigue. It took me into a spiritual world, and then I left it because it was hindering my spiritual world. So I
yeah,
no longer participate. I have no regrets, and I loved it. But there are also some very dark sides to it. There's some very negative
there
sides
can
to
be.
it. There were a lot of people that were in this lifestyle that I didn't want to associate with, just like with anything else. But the thing that I always liked with the group of people that I consider my core group is that there were meetings. It was like a club, and there were meetings, and we learned anatomy, and we learned how the body works, and we learned, just like, they have these pictures up in tattoo parlors where they say this is where it's going to hurt the most if you get a tattoo, and this is where it's going to hurt the least. We studied what the body could take and what it couldn't take, what was safe areas to play, what was not, and things of that nature. And we compared notes, and we shared ideas. And everyone that I associated with on an ongoing basis, safety was the first word of the sentence.
Mhm.
Safety, physical safety, mental safety, and emotional safety. And because it was a club, if someone showed up and you're like getting a red flag that this person's really got emotional issues, they were not allowed to participate. They could stay and watch, maybe, depending on the circumstances, but they were not allowed to participate in the group scenes and things that were going on. So there was a huge sense of awareness and a huge sense of responsibility going there.
So
Mhm.
the books also say that they didn't allow anyone to participate if they were drinking. Is that true?
No alcohol, none. Now, drugs, I'm sure people snuck drugs in or had them in their system, but you did sign a contract with the clubhouse that ones I attended, at least, no alcohol, no drugs, none whatsoever. And if there was any thoughts, then there was a person that was in charge of the house that night, and they would escort them out and tell them that they had to leave or they could not participate. So we were very aware of that. And
Mhm.
part of that is that you cannot sign away your rights to get hurt. You cannot give someone permission legally to hit you and to do certain things to you. So there was always the concern of legalities, always.
Yeah. There was always
Who's she
that.
talking to?
I don't know, but when we start talking about, especially with the aspects of like what pain does physically to the body, what it does mentally to the mind and the brain chemistry, and what it allows through that medium to release spiritually is not a new concept. You've got the monks and nuns who self-flagellate to purify the body of
Yep.
sin and impure thoughts. You've got the Buddhist monks who fast for hundreds of days, sometimes at a time, in self-sacrifice, and that's painful, and that's to, like if you look at every major spiritual leader in every major religion, almost from Christ to Buddha to Muhammad, at one point and beyond, at one point they all went for 40 days and 40 nights and fasted with no food or water in a cave in a dark space, or in the mountains, and depriving themselves of food, water, light, so that their body could get to the level where it can achieve enlightenment and attainment. Even in modern day times, if you look at the massage practice of Rolfing,
Oh
Rolfing,
gosh, I hate that. I hate
yes,
Rolf.
but
Ugh.
Rolfing, one of the whole purposes of Rolfing is really to separate that muscle from the bone, to cause that physical pain so that you can spark regeneration at the cellular level and release that emotional pain and that spiritual pain. That's one of the core concepts behind that. People have come out of a Rolfing session, with blacked out memories restored, with, traumas that they faced as a child, with, that being removed at a distance now, where they can objectively process it rather than subjectively be immersed into it.
I did
I
not
mean,
have that experience. What is it? A
yeah,
typical treatment is like 10 sessions, 12 sessions, something like that. I did them
yeah,
all. I did not have that experience.
you didn't
That
have
was
that experience.
no, I did not. I was so disappointed that I
Did you cry
didn't.
a lot?
I know I threatened to hit her a lot because it hurt so much. It hurt so much. And I did
It
not get
does.
any emotional or mental benefit from it. And I got very little physical benefit from it. I was so disappointed. So, but I understand the concept and I don't disagree with it. I just didn't have that experience. So,
Yeah.
you know.
What about you, Luann? Any thoughts on what we've been discussing?
Well, the only experience I have is reading it.
Yeah.
And I
Oh,
just
we should fix that.
no. Uh I am not into pain or experiencing pain.
You don't have to, it doesn't have to be pain. I'm glad you said that. It doesn't have to be pain. It doesn't have to even be physical.
It can be purely mental.
I
Yeah.
don't like that either.
Yeah.
Oh, I do
It
it to you
can,
all the time. You just don't know it.
see what I told you? It's in everyday life. It's a matter of degree and intensity, Deb. See, she
You know,
admitted it.
well, okay,
Because let's
maybe.
no,
Well,
seriously, let's be honest. Let's call a spade here.
I do
Seriously.
say things to trigger people to think. Okay. That
Exactly.
is a true
We
statement.
we do. And like I said, as loved ones and parents and friends and compatriots and whatever you want to call your circle of people, we always want what's best for them, right? And
Exactly.
and so and I've told Mark this, and I know he can hear me now in the past, but there is a way that you can, I don't try to force anybody to do anything. I will discuss it. I hate to be pushed to the point to argue. So I've learned over time, sometimes what you do is you just plant the seed, you mention it periodically a few times, and then eventually they'll remember it in some level, and it's their idea. And I've told every man I've ever met, this is, how a lot of women communicate with their men, because that way they don't have to get angry when the trash doesn't get taken out, or X, Y, and Z doesn't get done in a timely manner, because we realize that you don't want to be forced to do it. You don't want to be nagged to do it, but we will remind you periodically, and next thing you know, it's your idea. And we didn't have to force you, and that's how I try to do things. If I want something, I just mention it. Like, for instance, I'll give you an idea. My feet were really cold. I wanted thermal socks for my birthday or Christmas that year. So I mentioned them a few times. Okay. Now, got to the point where it was leap year. I proposed to him. And then come like that following spring, I still didn't have a ring, kind of thing. And he called me one day and said, let's go look at, I want to show you this ring that I saw. So we drove out to Rockwell, and I saw the ring, and I was like, okay, that's mine. And he's like, okay, I'll take care of it. And then we're sitting here at Christmas. And mind you, this is 3 years later, okay, that I had mentioned the thermal socks. 3 years later. So we're sitting here at his parents' house at Christmas, and he brings out this tiny little sack, and he's like, you're going to hate me. And I'm just like, oh my God, no, he's not proposing to me or giving me a ring in front of his parents right now. That was what was going through my head. And then when I opened the bag, there was my thermal socks that I asked for 3 years ago. Okay. So it was his idea to get me thermal socks, but at the same time, I had said I wanted them a few times, and I just kind of given up hope of getting them, but I got them.
Well, this is when I wish we had call-ins. I would love to hear what people might be commenting or thinking, or questions that they might have, because you don't want to share too much, but at the same time, it would be fun to share some of the things.
Well, it's like I said, it's just one of those things. Look, I look, for me, being as free willing as what I am mentally and spiritually when it comes to my attitudes towards BDSM and sexuality and sexual exploration in my life, I'm perfectly content being, in my relationship, and I tell him all the time. He used to tell me, he doesn't tell me anymore, but he used to say, you settled when you settled for me. I said, no, I settled up when I met you, because you stepped up. And he might not let me, spank him. He might not let me do any of those things that I used to have fun with. But you know what? I know he's there 24/7. He's always got my six, my back, if you will. And he is my biggest fan and my biggest supporter. And he's and he will tell me the truth sometimes, even when I don't really want to hear it, you know. And I
I'll tell you the
appreciate,
truth, even if you don't want to hear it.
I know that's why I don't hang out with you as often.
Well, the thing about it is that BDSM has a lot of downsides,
Yeah.
but what
Yeah.
they do, what it does is that it does, to me, it does two things. It brings out the best in people, and it also brings
Mhm.
out the worst in people.
Yeah, because see when
And so that you have that's but it helps you to get better at picking the people you associate with, and you start
yeah.
at recognizing, who is what. And that's what finally had me take myself out of this type of activities, even though I enjoyed it very much. There's never denying that. But I realized that I was becoming pure ego. I mean, it's
Mm.
good to have ego. We need
Well, there's a
ego.
risk. That's the power trip of it all, right? That's the risk we
It
take.
was. I was buying into my own hype. I mean, I literally had people
Mhm.
that traveled the world to come see me because of my reputation. And I started buying my own hype. And that I found that I had also started into my spiritual relationship with God, wanting to improve that. and getting back to what I felt like I had with him as a child. And I realized I couldn't do both. I could not, maybe a better person could have, I could not.
Mhm.
And I had to take myself out of my ego so I could focus on that journey back with him. And I've not regretted that. But I paid a price for that because it hurt a lot of my relationships as well, because
Yeah.
people didn't understand why I was changing. They didn't understand why I didn't do the things I used to do. They didn't understand really anything about me. So, there was a price to pay. But the upside is that because of what I learned through those experiences, I was strong enough to handle those rejections and the shifts
Yeah.
and the loss of companionship and the loss of relationships. So, again, I got nothing but positive from the experiences, but I also am thankful that I knew it was time to end it when I did. So,
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the thing with, again, that's one of the things about this community and this lifestyle, if you will, um, is that I think very few other scenarios or places in your life that are not life-threatening, if you will, uh, teach you. I think this of who you are, what your limits are, what you're all about, who you are at the core of your being. Very often people have to be who aren't a part of this particular type of community, they have to face death, or they're in a life-threatening situation before they realize what they're made of, or they realize who they are as a human being, what their limits and their boundaries are, what they're willing to do, what they're not willing to do, and some of the most stable, spiritually balanced, uh, financially balanced, mentally balanced people that I've ever met in my life are part of the BDSM community and some of its, offshoot sub communities. Um, Whereas I know people that, allegedly were raised in the church, you know, um, or this religion or that religion, and they're batshit crazy and manipulative as all get out and are 110% ego and aren't about, what it is to be a good human being, a kind human being, a compassionate human being. We're seeing it right now in our day to day, and we're constantly seeing people who are pure ego, literally pure ego, trying to run the world right now, and they're literally playing some of the biggest, and for lack of a better, kinder expression, some of the biggest mind games and overall mind fucks
mhm.
that I've ever seen in my life. I literally was watching a Georgia congressperson say that, and I'm not trying to keep it political or anything, but literally the narrative that this person tried to spin was, well, when I was in 11th grade, Biden made it so unsafe. And I'm like, first off, you're in your 40s. Biden was not president of the United States when you were in 11th grade. You know, that's a false narrative. So, it's like people are trying to on both sides of the aisle. I'm not just going to blame one side of the aisle, but you know, we as human beings, there's some truths in this world that I know, and that is we as human beings are masters of the art of justification. We can justify anything. It's just part of being human. Number two, um, well, let's just leave it at number one for now, because number two, I'll go off on a rant. So we're going to hold back.
Well, I love that you said that because it reminds me of one of my favorite movie lines and it's in the movie The Big Chill. And he says, well, you're just using rationalizations. He goes, don't mock rationalizations. They're one of the most important things in our life. And the other guy's,
They are.
no, really? More important than sex? He goes, how long has it been since you've had sex? He goes, about a week. He goes, how long have you gone without a rationalization? I love that. I absolutely love that.
But it's
Um,
true. We can justify anything. Like we as humans can justify murder. We can justify subjugating entire races of people. It's repeated throughout our history, and I think
And that's my objection to getting rid of the history that we've been getting rid of is it needs to be in our face because we don't want to repeat that.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Those who
Exactly.
forget history or ignore history, depending on whose version you read, are doomed to repeat it, or they're bound to repeat it.
Yeah.
And I
Don't
like
be
that, Tracy.
changing it. We need to be saying this happened because this is wrong. And this
Yeah.
happened.
Well, what gets me is the audacity of literally, we have something that is on video in news reports that the entire world has seen, and this has been repeated in recent years, but then entire communities of people will come out and deny that it ever happened. And I don't see that in very often, or at least I didn't when I was, the brief time in life that I was part of that community, or part of that scene, if you will. I didn't see any of that, if that makes sense. They were very protective of one another, the people who are genuinely part of this community. You've got your weekend warriors, as I call them, or the people who suffer from the bridesmaid syndrome, you know, or the bridal shower syndrome. Because at the bridal shower, in addition to sexy lingerie, you're going to see handcuffs. You might see little baby whipper pedals like this, or you might even see something more risque, like a pair of nipple clamps. you know uh Back in the day, it would have been nipple clamps, the hardcore ones like this, that are like surgical stainless steel, that have like the pressure and everything. But
Oh,
nowadays you're not going to
wait a
see
minute, wait a
these.
minute, wait. You've got plastic on yours. Real ones don't have plastic. They're just
No,
alligator.
this is removable, baby. This is
Well, take those
removable.
suckers off.
The teeth are in here. But what I'm saying is, nowadays you won't even see these. You won't even see
Yeah.
these hardly anymore. You're going to see things like this.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I use these for? Comic relief. I'm a moderator in a lot of chat room and a few chat rooms, and so when things get really tense, I have a picture of me with these little nipple suction cups, and I say, "Okay, it's too strict. Now it's time for some clown nipples." And so I put them on. They look like clown noses, so they're clown nipples. And I have a picture of me that when things get really tense in the room, I just go, "Okay, here you go. Now it's time for some clown nipples," and then literally that's everybody's signal to cool it, and put the attention where it really needs to be, and that's on me.
Well, the bottom line is that it's hard to be in a negative frame of mind if you look at things from a knowledgeable standpoint. And the knowledgeable standpoint is that if you're with a community that is training you and teaching you the proper way to do certain things so that you don't hurt people, so that you learn open communication, so you learn proper lines and boundaries and what to do and what not to do, and that community holds you accountable, then those are all positives. That's the bottom line. And don't ever confuse fun, kinky, one-on-one sex between two consenting adults to other types of things. They may merge, but they are still separate identities. And that's the
Yeah,
whole thing. And here's what's really funny. I remember when Shades of Grey came out, and I was like, I'm gonna go see that because I just know that's gonna
I
be,
haven't even read the book.
well, I haven't either, but I just said that's going to be such a stupid movie. I was actually quite impressed with the way they handled the emotional and mental aspects of the lifestyle, dealing with his tragedy, his emotional
Hmm.
damage, and how he used the play to work through that, because it really
Hmm.
is like theater therapy, and which
Yeah.
is now recognized as and traditional therapy. You can actually get master degrees in it and training in theater therapy, drama
Speaking of
therapy.
theater therapy, Deb, you mentioned 50 Shades of Grey. What about its precursor, The Secretary?
Oh, I love that movie. I
Really
love
good
that
movie,
movie.
right?
But she's a pushy bottom. She's a real pushy bottom. Throwing that cockroach out on the bed to drive him nuts when he gets home. Woo! She's a bad girl.
Are you sure she was being pushy bottom, or was she just trying to instigate and inspire
That's a
and
pushy
lead?
bottom. That's a
Okay.
pushy bottom. If you want to instigate and inspire your dominant, you sit down and have an honest conversation. You don't do things to push their buttons to egg them on. That's bad communication. She's
Are you talking about me?
Yes, I'm pushing about you. He's a pushy bottom. So I will. So since he entered the room and exposed himself, I will tell you one quick story before we close. One of the things that I was very certain of when we developed our relationship, and I knew that it was not going to be just a community relationship, it was going to be a personal relationship, is that I was very insistent that if we were going to get married, he was going to have to wear a wedding ring. And he was not of the frame of mind to wear wedding rings or any kind of rings. They drove him nuts. So I blindfolded him one day and tied him to the bed, fully clothed, nothing kinky going on here. And then I put a ring on every single finger of his hand, both hands, and stomped out of the room like I was leaving and slammed the door and told him to lay there and be quiet and he better be still and better be there when I got back. And then I sat down in front of the door and just waited. And he went nuts, you know. And then after, probably 5 or 10 minutes of struggling and fidgeting and all that stuff, he started to calm down. And then 10 minutes later, he went to sleep. And he's wore rings ever since then. So that was something that helped him to push through, a blockage, not a boundary. That was not a boundary.
Yeah.
It was a blockage.
Yeah.
And he had no idea that we were going to do that, but we had negotiated that we were going to work on blockages and things of that nature. And this was not something I just threw at him out of the blue. So anyway, just a fun little personal story to share with y'all. So, all right, Luann, thoughts, final thoughts.
It's interesting to read. It's interesting to think about, but I will not be participating.
And she has such a cute bottom.
She does have a cute little tushy, doesn't she?
She does. She does. What about you, Crystal? Final thoughts?
My final thoughts on the subject, and this applies to any aspect of your life, whether we're talking BDSM or just getting up, finding the courage to get up that day because you're tired and you've worn out, is be fearless. If you're really, I guess really what I'm trying to say more than anything else is be unafraid, be unapologetic, and be fearless. You mentioned earlier about communication and getting to know the community and getting to know people in the community. And I think something that the world at large can take from the BDSM community is that they are very close knit and they do look out for each other. And it is a sense of family, a sense of group, a sense of togetherness, if you will. And I think in few other subgroups does it come down to getting to know each other on an individual basis, getting to know groups of people and their thoughts on and trying to understand those different aspects of the community. You mentioned, power exchange. You mentioned dom sub. You mentioned mind games. You mentioned, actual physical games, things like that. So, y'all get to know each other. And right now in our world at large, this is an example of macrocosm here. We have this little microcosm of the community that really exemplifies the concept of getting to know the community, tolerance, understanding, knowing and respecting boundaries and limits of the other parties involved in the conversation or the interaction or the scene. And right now on the macrocosm, we've got an entire world, forget just this country, but the entire world is in turmoil because you've got entire communities refusing to understand or get to know one another. And it becomes you're evil, you're what's wrong with the world, you're evil, you're what's wrong with the world. And instead, I think that whole adage of remember, if we stop and think and get to know one another, we will realize that we have more in common than we have in differences. And so in the end, be inquisitive, be fearless, be compassionate, be communicative, and be open-minded and open-hearted, period.
Well, as with a lot of things, I may not participate or I may not want to do it, or I may not do it because I don't believe it, but I will defend your right to be able to do it.
Well, you could be my second and stand there and hold my paddle. No, I love what you said, Crystal, because it's really a great lead in to one of my two final points. One of them is that I've never been with a more diverse group of people than when I was with PEP, because it was Black, it was white, it was Asian, it was, just about every ethnicity you could think of. It was male, it was female, it was trans, it was queer, it was everything. I mean, there were no lines. It was just, the only lines drawn was three. Are you dom? Are you sub? Are you a switch? That's all we
Yeah.
need to know.
And
And do you have a collar? And who do I need permission to have to play with you? But because it did teach such diversity of acceptance and compassion and understanding, and also understanding of people's physical and emotional,
yeah.
mental needs, I did a lot of Christian couple coaching for about 6 years. And these were generally couples that came to me that felt like their churches had failed them, or their Christian counselors had failed them. And the troubles generally involved cheating, or lack of connection in the bedroom. And I have often thought, wouldn't it be interesting to put together a program for Christian couples, teaching them the ins and outs of what sustains a BDSM relationship, as far as the communication, the negotiation, and teaching them how to have the freedom to explore their mindsets and their kinks and their ideas, and do it unafraid, and do it openly with their partner that they feel like God has put them together with. And I don't know, maybe it's time to think about that seriously. So something for me to put some more thought to.
Yeah.
So Luann, tell them how to find you and your herbs.
Herballou.com. That's HERBAL-LU.com.
And Baruti Spa, so we can all come and look beautiful like you do, my dear, today.
Oh, thank you so much. You're so sweet. Yeah, it's a www.barutispa.com. It's at Baruti_spa on Instagram, and it's Baruti Spa or Baruti Knows on Facebook. And we are open currently 5 days a week, soon to be 6 days a week once I'm back to work. We do hair removal. We do facials, we do hydrofacial, we do LED treatments, we do guided meditations. Coming soon, we're having a singing bowl in the next few months. So we're gonna start up a sip and learn here this summer during the hottest time. We're gonna be Margarita Madness basically once a month.
I don't need to learn how to drink margaritas, so I will come and be the example.
Okay.
So, all right. So this is Deborah Colleen Rose, and I have a Investigative Solutions Group, ISGU.com, and milesofsmilesevents.com. So you can have a private investigator, or you can have fun, or you can do both, depending on if you have too much fun. And I wear a hat because my hair's too frizzy. So there you have it. So we will see y'all next week.
Bye.